Hello, I'm Jeff Sawyer, CCI's Director of Employer and Professional Network Development. This Future Forward segment features Lucie Ide, founder and CEO of Rimidi, a leading clinical management platform for the healthcare industry. Lucie is an experienced healthcare executive with a demonstrated history of understanding complex problems and developing innovative, impactful solutions. She's also a member of the Women Business Leaders of the U.S. Healthcare Industry Foundation, as well as a trustee of Middlebury College. Lucie graduated from Middlebury in 1997 with a degree in physics and Spanish. Lucie is joining us to share her unique perspectives on the intersection of patient care, data, technology, policy, and purpose in the rapidly evolving healthcare market, including a snapshot of the evolving healthcare market today, some of the challenges and opportunities influencing the future of this field, and her career advice for students to position themselves to enter the healthcare field in the future. Lucie, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
Lucie, this set of Future Forward features focuses on women leaders in STEM-related career fields. I must say that you are the embodiment of this focus, a BA degree in physics, an MD, PhD in molecular and systems pharmacology, and having founded a healthcare technology business. Can we begin with you telling us a little bit about the current state of affairs within the healthcare market?
Sure. So one of the characteristics of the healthcare market that interested me in leaving clinical medicine and moving over to become an entrepreneur and work on the business side is the spend, right? We've been inching up on reaching 20% of gross domestic product being spent on healthcare in the United States. And if you Google, per capita healthcare spending and life expectancy, there's a terrific graph that gets updated every couple of years that shows how the US is sort of this outlier, right? Far to the right on the axis, but not very high, in that we spend almost twice what most other developed countries do on healthcare, yet we are dead last in that pack on life expectancy. So to me, that's the elephant in the room in healthcare is how can we possibly spend this much money on healthcare in the US and not get the results? If this was any other industry, everybody would have been fired. But it's healthcare, and healthcare is different.
So I'm just curious. I think we all hear, we may not know, but we all hear that expenditures on healthcare keep growing. What are some of the drivers of that cost growth?
It's this weird, multifactorial, causation, and sort of a weird dichotomy in the US because we arguably have the best healthcare in the world, right? And that's because we do sick care really, really well. If you have a rare cancer or need a complicated surgery, people fly from all over the world to the United States to receive that kind of healthcare. What we don't do well is sort of preventative primary care medicine. We don't do healthcare well. We do sick care really well. And that's where all the dollars are spent, on the sick care side. And if we could invest more of those dollars in managing people to health, we could avoid a lot of the dollars spent on sick care. There are other factors driving this, right? Aging population, the fact that our medicine is so good that people live longer. And then, many people have probably heard about the large sort of undue, disproportional amount of healthcare spend that could be at the end of life in the last, days and weeks of life. So there are a lot of factors that drive it, but I'd say the primary ones are, we've got to shift to spending more money on preventative well care. Part of that is an access problem. We need to give access to that kind of care to more people. And then we, have to make some of the tougher decisions of how do we contain cost when there isn't necessarily demonstrated benefit, but we as clinicians and we as the healthcare system keep trying to fix people at a stage of life when maybe they're not fixable.
So I'm curious, we've obviously been in a period of time that's been different than perhaps the last 100 years. And I am curious how the pandemic has changed things in care provision.
Mhm. So one of the, I do a lot of my work around chronic disease management. And part of the problem with our health system is that it has been this very episodic model of care. You know, you go see a doctor once a year for an annual checkup, or twice a year or 4 times a year if you have type 2 diabetes to get your, average blood sugar level tested. And a lot of those are artificial constructs, right? And it has to do with the way reimbursements are driven. So it kind of created this behavior of how we accessed healthcare in the clinic, in front of a doctor at a certain cadence, because that's how it was paid by, Medicare and by insurance companies. And one thing the pandemic did is it sort of blew that whole thing up, right? Because people couldn't go to the clinic. We went from 2% telemedicine adoption to anywhere between 40 and 70% telemedicine adoption at different health systems overnight. And I think that had a lot of people scratching their heads, right? Of actually, for consumers and physicians, this is a pretty good thing, being able to access healthcare the same way you might access other services. If you need advice from your lawyer, you don't have to go sit in their waiting room and sit in their office to speak with them. If you want to work with your financial advisor, you can do a lot of that digitally online, and don't have to drive across town, take half a day off of work and sit in their office. So healthcare's been lagging there tremendously, and the pandemic really showed us that consumers want better convenience and access, but also that the clinicians enjoyed it too.
So is the jury still out, or do we have enough information now to say that the move to a virtual care adoption has actually been, quote, successful?
I think so, right? There's a large push to gather that data and definitively prove what has been working and maybe what hasn't. By and large, I've heard that the concerns that there would be all this overutilization if we opened that up without restrictions hasn't happened. So people aren't just having telemedicine visits just for the heck of it, and they're not really sick enough to need to talk to a doctor. Like that, I've heard that is generally not happening. I think there will be some swing back from the peaks that we saw during the pandemic. I do think, that laying on of hands, right, that they talk about in medicine, it is still important in certain patients due to their preference or due to their health conditions, still will really prefer to see a healthcare provider in person. So I think it's not an either or, it's how do they complement each other in the right proportions.
Tell us a little bit about Rimidi and your role there.
Sure. So I am the founder and CEO of Rimidi. I started Rimidi, it'll be 10 years next year that I started down this path, deciding to leave clinical practice. I had trained in OBGYN and to start a technology company. And really the initial premise was, why can't we use data about patients to drive decision-making about patients, which is a pretty simple idea, right? We talk about a lot of things being data-driven, and unfortunately, healthcare has not traditionally been as data-driven as it should. So I started down that path, specifically working on diabetes and how we can use data both from the clinic and hospital about that patient, diagnoses, imaging, other characteristics of the patient, laboratory tests, together with data that the patient collects, right? What's their experience of having diabetes? What's their blood glucose at home when they test it? And then layer on the analytics around that to help clinicians make more evidence-based and data-driven decisions. So that was sort of our roots in the concept, and then have grown that to work really as sort of an enterprise platform within the healthcare space to provide health systems and their clinicians, again, with the data and the tools they need to make the best decision they can about each patient.